Just by way of introduction, I'm Sudhir Kulkarni. I'm a managing partner at a firm called Sourcebits. We are a Sequoia-funded company, Sequoia and IDG-funded company. We've been around for about 5 years. This is kind of my quick, shameless plug for the company, and I promise you it's not going to be more than 30 seconds. What we do is we build mobile solutions, and we build mobile solutions for education, healthcare, and brands. That's CPG companies. That's pretty much what we do. And we've been around for 6 years, about 400 people, headquartered in San Francisco, have centers in Detroit, Connecticut, and Austin. And we have a development center in India. And we have designers stationed in the US and in Europe. So the work that we do primarily is what we call as design-driven engineering. And the reason why we say design-driven engineering is because the small form factor that a mobile device offers presents a significant amount of challenges when it comes to making sure that the user's experience is right. And you just mentioned about going through a program to try to write an HTML5, CSS3 app for access across multiple devices. But when you start testing that, you realize the key issue or the key ingredient of it is user experience. So we started out as a design shop, and we started out with that theme in mind that engineering has to be driven by design when it comes to mobile. And that's pretty much what Sequoia probably thought was worth investing in. Okay, the topic for the day is a little tricky. So as you know, educational institutions by nature are supposed to be innovators, right? They're supposed to be the risk takers. They're supposed to be the scientists and the advancers of technology and so on. And you would expect that they are the ones that would take technology to the next level when it comes to running their own operations, running their own content, running their own educational programs. And that's pretty much what you started seeing, but they are not the early adopters, unfortunately. And only now in the last 2 or 3 years, you've started seeing this whole wave of innovation happening in the education space, and it's a very ripe sort of time right now for innovation in education. And the only singular factor that this can be attributed to is the advent of the iPad. So if you see the adoption of the iPads in educational institutions, and the entire education industry is sort of in a whirl to try and see how can we deal with this whole phenomenon of iPads in the classroom. So if I were to just give you some notable data points here, the city of LA, the school district of LA, which is one of the largest school districts in the country, ordered 50,000 iPads as a trial. So just imagine what might be going on right now in terms of all the universities, the university campuses. So K through 12 education, university education, everybody is looking at content, collaboration, and administration. Those are the 3 key things that you would see that are being innovated on in the education space. So what I'm going to walk you through is what some of the things that we have observed as a technology company, and what we see are the lessons. The topic was kind of geared, this conference asked us to gear this topic to say, this innovation is happening in education, how does it apply to the enterprise, right? If I just sit here and say, okay, here's what education is innovating on, you can just Google it and try and find out what is going on and find out what Sourcebits has been doing in this space as well. So I thought we'll take my experience of having run this for several education companies and try to apply it and see how our enterprises looking at or should look at the benefits of the innovation that is happening in the education space. But the theme will remain the same, which is that there are 3 areas, which are content, collaboration, and administration. Those 3 are the areas in which educational institutions are innovating using mobility as a technology base. Now, if you start looking at why is this relevant for the enterprise? Now, when you start looking at the next generation of employees in any corporation, who are these next generation of employees? These are the kind of employees that have been students in the K through 12 system or the university system, and they are going to be part of the education system graduates that get into jobs. And when they look at an enterprise software, when they look at enterprise IT, they look at it with a different pair of glasses. They do not look at it from the pair of glasses that I look at it as, or what many of you in this audience look at. So if you look at how they're going to look at things, they've grown with digital, they've grown with mobile, they've been born and raised looking at Facebook, looking at social media. They are a connected sort of group. They will never be able to have the same kind of isolated, analog, tethered systems that you would typically find in enterprises even today. So that is something that what education institutions are actually providing to the enterprise to learn from. Because these students that are used to these kind of campus innovations that are going on, expect the same kind of innovation to happen in their companies. So if you look at the company's landscapes today, the Google landscape or the Facebook landscape or Microsoft even today, are trying to emulate the campus environments of the current campuses. And they are involving themselves with all these features to be provided as a part of their entire IT infrastructure, as a part of their entire offering. So that's kind of what is important. And the other three things are that when you look at content itself, consumption of the content is not the only thing that people are looking at doing. People are looking at creating the content. So we're not talking about crowdsourcing of enterprise IT systems, but we're talking about employees contributing to those systems in more meaningful ways, and they want them to be open enough to be able to take their suggestions and be able to rapidly deploy. So for example, if you have a typical traditional enterprise system, that enterprise system is inflexible. So enterprises are starting to look at things which can be on the go. I don't know how many of you have looked at concepts like composite apps, which were yesterday's concept. But the whole app economy with billions of downloads is now starting to affect the enterprise, where not just consuming data, but also creating data, creating content is important from the employee's point of view. The employee wants to be socially interactive with that content. The employee wants to have open systems as opposed to closed systems. They don't want to be boxed into, like you were saying, they don't want to be boxed into device A or device B. They want more open. Give me something that can work on any device. And these two big trends that are happening in the enterprise world are kind of corroborating that. The BYOD, which I'm pretty sure you've heard often enough, bring your own device, and also consumerization of IT. These two trends are kind of overlaying this whole thing. And my thesis here is that the learning from the education institutions that are innovating in the space of mobile is big for the enterprise, because the employees are the same that were students yesterday. So that's how I think I look at the enterprise IT systems. And not changing stuff is not an option. You got to change, you got to adopt to this or adapt to this generation Y, their needs and their requirements to be social, to be mobile, to be, to create content themselves, and to be able to get open systems rather than closed systems. So this thing is something that you can ignore at your own peril. So as I talked about adoption, I mean, I'm not trying to bore you with a lot of statistics of how much device adoption is there, etc. We can talk till the cows come home about all that stuff. But basically, PCs have started falling behind all the device shipments that have been there in the year 2011. PCs were overtaken by iPads and other devices, smartphones, in terms of shipments from the manufacturers. So suffice it to say that the mobile device adoption is probably going to be the key driver of all enterprise system development in the future. So we're absolutely right in trying to say, okay, if we want to be next generation, programmers, if we want to be next generation enterprise IT, this is what we need to learn, that mobile is the starting point and mobile is probably the ending point of all systems development going forward. Social. Now, when you say social, there's different concepts that people have in mind about social. People think, oh, social means Facebook, there are privacy issues, etc. Enterprises are never going to look at. But if you start looking at companies that are starting to thrive in this space, there are big companies that have started, looking at this. Jive has been a tremendous success in this space. Zincro is another one that is emerging in this space. Chatter, Salesforce Chatter, you've all probably heard about. Yammer, with their acquisition, has always been, in the news. But all these are telling us some trend. The trend that they're telling us is that people do not want to be isolated when they're working on their machines or their enterprise systems. They want to be able to interact with people. So if I'm a sales guy, I'm on the field. If I'm proceeding with a prospect and trying to get a deal closed, I want to be able to find out who else in my entire company of maybe 100,000 people has worked on a similar deal within a minute, and I should be able to call that person and collaborate with them. So that's the aspect of social that people are missing, and people in the enterprise space are now attending to big time, and they are trying to involve themselves with all these jive kind of systems. Content sourcing, earlier it used to be always that, when enterprise systems were made, there was like a typical waterfall model where you decided, okay, there's a whole team that goes in, product managers go in, and requirement specifications are laid out, and all that good stuff happened, and then you built this whole massive monolithic structure called an ERP system, or a CRM system, or a supply chain system, and you put that on the desktop of every single employee. Gone are those days. The future, as educational institutions are now telling us, are showing us, is that content is going to be generated, content is going to be consumed, content is going to be absorbed as a part of the ecosystem within the enterprise in a very dynamic fashion. It's not going to be because of a monolithic system that just has a top-down approach to disseminate content. Content will be generated. Many of the people at the top may not even know how much of that collaboration is happening with that content within the system that they are adopting. And then the pace with which these things are developing is enormous. I mean, just in the last 18 months, large educational institutions have adopted systems from companies such as Pearson, SunGard, Scholastic. Some of them are customers in a very big way, and they have changed the face of how people have been using these systems. And I'll talk about some of those. So 3 core areas, as I mentioned. The first area is where I would say the content itself. When you look at content, there are 3 areas: content, collaboration, and administration. But if you look at content itself, the way you are trying to deal with content, this is a company that we work with, and I'm just going to take some examples. Conover is a company that deals with special education kids. So special education kids get into schools, and the school system typically pays, for an average kid in California, they pay about $10,000 per kid. For a special ed kid, the amount of money that the education system pays is anywhere between $20,000 to $150,000 per kid per year. Now that's big money when it is which is being thrown at kids that are special education needs kids. But the systems that are given to them are still the same age-old system. So this is one company that we work with, which is innovating in terms of everything that is completely cognitively researched for special education kids and offered on touch-based devices. And they have said in their own sort of assessment that this is revolutionizing the entire industry of how special education kids are dealt with. So you need to look at the content, and you need to look at the consumer of that content and see how mobile or particularly touch-based devices can really transform their whole ability to absorb or retention of content. And this is one example that is really significant because it is saving a ton of money for the school education systems, plus it's also improving the retention levels almost 3 times as much as they had before. So this is a tremendous benefit socially as well as economically. Similarly, if you look at the pace of learning, now some of these things, again, it's not visible, too much visible, but this is an example of a teacher dashboard that tells the teacher for the group of people that are in their class, they are segregated according to the high achievers, the medium achievers, the low achievers. So as the class is progressing, they are able to visualize on their own iPad what is going on inside the class. The class is already outfitted with iPads that are all connected, and they're able to see live as to how many of the kids in which group are performing along the benchmark or below the benchmark and above the benchmark and so on. So this is all happening live at the source of the instruction itself. So the pace of learning, the teacher can decide that, okay, kids in group A versus kids in group B, they can actually go ahead and give them additional help as they go through the progress of the course itself. Similarly, if you look at a lot of the, again, this is something that is just telling you about how the dashboards for content delivery, we are still talking about the content itself. The content has to be tailored to specifically a kid or specifically a group of kids, and that can be done by the technology that now is available, and in a very dynamic fashion. The teacher can actually sit at this control, it's almost like a console or a control center at their desk, and be able to find out who's absorbing what and what content needs to be pushed to them. So the next thing that they see on their screens is something different. So each kid in the class may be actually working on different problems at any point in time. So that's kind of the innovation that is going on. Now, in terms of collaboration, and again, I'm going a little bit fast here so that I can give my colleague speaker here some time to take up the rest of the hour. So again, Blackboard is another company that we work very closely with. They have innovated significantly. They've put together a program or an application called Collaborate. And we worked on that extensively to try to put it on iPads and iPhones and Android devices now in multiple different formats. And what they do is the collaboration between students is what they track. The collaboration between faculty members is what they track. The collaboration is done in the context of a classroom. The collaboration is done in the context of a course. Or so far, what used to happen is what happened in a classroom remained in that classroom. One teacher and 20 students is all that were privy to that content of that in that classroom. Now, with Collaborate, they are able to actually disseminate that. They're able to capture the essence of it. They're able to have best practices culled out automatically and transmitted across the entire set of teachers that are in a similar classroom. So that's another sort of example where they're driving that collaboration around the content and around the way of teaching. Now, how does this become relevant to an enterprise? This is exactly the point that I was making, that collaboration in the enterprise follows very much similar patterns. That when two people are working, like the sales guy's example that I took, they might be working on similar deals, but in two different geographies completely. But if they can be put together automatically, just because the context of what they're doing is same, the collaboration tools are there today to be able to use those devices, and wherever they are, at whatever point in time, they can instantaneously collaborate on making sure that the enterprise gets successful results out of it. And then the last area that I want to highlight is administration. So there's a lot of, typically what happens is that you think that, okay, when your kid is trying to apply to college, they go through all these SAT exams, and they go through all these test papers and the applications, and the whole process, essay writing, etc., is phenomenally tedious, and it also gets into it's a time-consuming process, not just for the student but also for the schools, because they ask you to sort of apply like months in advance of the session starting. Now, MIT Sloan School of Management worked with us to try to put together a completely revamped admission process. They called it AdmitPad, and that process of AdmitPad, basically what it does is, on the iPad, everything that students have submitted, every single piece of work that they have submitted, their essays, their applications, their scores, everything comes in one single screen, and the admission officers are able to collaborate. Not only collaborate, they're able to annotate, they're able to put in notes, they're able to put in details of which kid deserves what kind of attention. There is a calendar that allows them to sort of manage the entire workflow. So basically the entire process of admissions has been streamlined. And this is a big lesson, because typically what happens in most enterprise accounts or enterprise customers that we work with is that there are processes that you don't even think that can be put on an iPad or on a mobile device. This particular process, when we went in there, they never thought that this could be put on an iPad. But when we went in and thought through the whole thing and decided what parts of the process could be handled and what parts couldn't, we discovered that innovative ways could be brought in, including a very significant amount of customization of the device itself, or the device capabilities itself, to be able to bring all the tools that they need to complete their admissions process. So when companies start looking at these kind of processes, which are typical, expense management process, supply chain process, when you look at individual processes, they are going to be broken down into pieces, and they are going to be able to be managed on the devices rather than trying to, emulate them, in a desktop environment. Some other examples of, companies that have been doing that very significantly is today, we know that Hershey's 6,000 of their sales reps, they were trying to get they used to have these binders which are about 300 to 400 pages worth of binders. They would always carry them in their bags. Those binders are gone and they're replaced by this process where everything that the sales rep does in their entire day is done on these iPad-based systems that they have implemented. Now these are things that we have done which kind of are similar to what process innovation is in the education business. Similarly, if you look at Intel, this is an example from a project that we did for Intel, where I don't know how many of you know that Intel has their own airline. They fly between different campuses, so their entire booking system was built by us, and that booking system is not available on any desktop. It's available only on the iPads and phones. So now we are skipping one generation and saying we don't really need a system. If I want to fly from Folsom to Santa Clara, I just do it, using my iPhone. I don't need to. I'm in the middle of a meeting, and after the meeting, I need to go to this campus. I just book it right there and go. So those are the kind of innovations that have happened. So to recap very briefly, there is a lot of learning that you can take from educational institutions in terms of how they are innovating on mobile technology. There are three main areas that I outlined. One is content, the other is collaboration, and the third is administration. And in each of these, you can start looking at enterprise companies typically starting to break up some of their processes, some of their monolithic structures and some of their IT systems, and try to recreate them, and try to not try to just put a patch on it and say, now we had this web system, now it's available on mobile. Now we had this Windows based application, now it's available on mobile. That's not how people are doing it. If they really were to take the innovations in mobile to heart, they should be completely thinking afresh about the process itself. And that is going to be huge benefits, cost benefits, social benefits, employee satisfaction benefits, and in all kinds of ways, these innovations are going to be tremendously beneficial. So I'm open for questions. I think I have about 5 minutes, and after that we have a augmented reality presentation, which is going to be far more demo worthy and interesting. So any questions, any of you?
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
Following up on what you mentioned about Intel's booking system.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting that you mentioned they use iPads and iPhones. Why
Yes,
not?
they're a Windows.
I mean, Intel x86 versus ARM, so it's kind of.
Well,
they don't use like their Ultrabooks or something to book. Or?
They have actually opened it up as a BYOD kind of a concept. People can just use whatever system they have.
But
whatever.
You mentioned that their booking system is, I think, iOS only or something. Or?
No, it's not iOS only. It's devices only.
The front end, yeah.
It's devices only on the front
okay.
end. So Windows devices, Android devices, iOS devices, don't care.
Oh, okay.
That was the whole thought process. So it's, instead of saying,
What kind of cross-platform solution are you using, or did you just do native for each of the platforms?
we made native apps for each one of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the typical thing that she was also asking in the beginning, I'm sorry, what is your name again?
Oh, Chinsi.
Chinsi. What Chinsi was asking about was HTML5 versus native in the initial conversation that we had. And you still, at this point in time, the jury is still out, in our opinion, about HTML5. It may take about a year to 18 months before we can say that every single device is really, truly supported very well. Because when we start testing out HTML5 applications once they're built, they can be built to a specific device or device platform. Even though they are supposed to be cross-platform, you can test them and you can build them to that, but they are not guaranteed to work on every single one of them with the kind of pixel perfection that you would want to have. The native, of course, right. It's not just the fragmentation, it's also the user interface elements, the kind of rigor with which the user interface elements can be utilized.
Yeah. Getting back to, okay, so you mentioned that it's mostly existing like Android, like Windows Phone. What about, I guess, the new, I think something about x86 phones that are coming out or something? Or?
Yeah, so the x86 phones are going to be interesting as a segue into, you know, first of all, let's see how the Microsoft dynamic changes things. And I think
Windows 8.
exactly. So after Microsoft has, you know, it's too early to say how it'll change the landscape. But I don't see Android or iOS giving up their dominance anytime soon.
Which means that you didn't develop an x86 native version of the Intel.
Well, you could.
Even though Intel's an x86 company, so well, they're trying to push out x86 phones.
Well, I think they're just going by the consumer demand. See, this whole thing about, you know, who's the consumer and who's the employee, right? It's kind of merged together now, right? So if my consumer/employee is coming in and bringing an iPhone, who am I to say, hey, dump that device, I'm going to give you an x86 device. That's the standard. You need to use that. That happened with BlackBerry, and how many companies are still surviving with those kind of policies?
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who still carry a BlackBerry and an iPhone, you know, in one in each pocket, and they say, this is my company-given device, the company doesn't give me an iPhone.
Right.
How lame is that? I mean, those days are, I think, gone, if you ask me.
Well, Microsoft is still like you can't use iPhone.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you know, you're bound to. I mean, you can walk into an Apple, you know, office, and you can still use a PC. They don't unless there are certain parts of IT that they will allow you to use PCs. But you know, most of the product engineering side, most of the product development side, the design side, they will all frown on using a competing product. Can't say the same thing about BlackBerry though, right? You had a question?
Yeah. Do you see more of education going towards iOS or do they care?
No, more towards Android, as a matter of fact.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Android? Wow.
Because students always go for the cheaper stuff.
Okay.
So students will always want to have things that are, you know, free, you know, available to download with no issues.
Okay.
You know, even the developers that are catering to the student community with the apps that you find,
Right.
they are also looking at disseminating those in large numbers on Android devices.
Okay.
Although personally, I'm a Mac fan and
Right.
an Apple fan, but
Okay.
that's the reality.
Interesting.
I mean, it kind of mirrors the general population as well, in terms of the Android devices being large in number
Right.
compared to the iOS devices. But as far as the richness of the iOS devices and the applications and the amount of money that the ecosystem makes, the app ecosystem makes, there's no comparison.
Okay.
It's completely not comparable. I think for every dollar that is spent, they say 80 cents in the app economy, 80 cents goes to Apple.
Yeah. Well, Windows is changing there, so they're the most profitable.
Windows
Yeah.
may change things, you know,
Yeah.
it
Well,
might edge
announced
up. We'll see.
They've
We'll
got
see how it
70%
goes.
and 80%.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.